Rachel Martinez moved through the first-class cabin of American Airlines Flight 318 with a practice efficiency that came from 7 years of commercial aviation service. At 32 years old, she had mastered the art of providing exceptional customer service while managing the complex logistics of keeping passengers comfortable, safe, and properly served during cross-country flights. Her warm smile, professional demeanor, and ability to handle difficult situations with grace had earned her recognition as one of the airline's most reliable and respected crew members. What her passengers and colleagues didn't know was that Rachel's remarkable composure under pressure, her instinctive ability to manage crisis situations, and her natural leadership during emergencies came from a previous career that had nothing to do with commercial aviation. Before she had been Rachel Martinez, senior flight attendant, she had been Petty Officer First Class Rachel Santos, one of the few women ever to serve as a helicopter rescue swimmer with the U.S. Navy's elite search and rescue operations. Rachel's military career had been defined by missions that most people couldn't imagine and wouldn't want to attempt. Flying in Navy helicopters over some of the world's most dangerous waters, she had rappelled into ocean swells during storms to rescue downed pilots, coordinated complex multi-aircraft rescue operations in hostile territories, and provided emergency medical care to wounded service members under conditions that would challenge the most experienced trauma surgeons. Her specialty had been what the Navy called high-risk extraction operations, missions where traditional rescue methods were impossible due to weather, enemy action, or terrain obstacles that required unconventional approaches and exceptional individual skill. Rachel had completed 47 combat rescue missions over a 5-year period, saving the lives of 23 military personnel and earning commendations that were classified at levels most people would never see. But Rachel's military service had ended not because of injury or mission failure, but because of a personal decision that reflected her understanding of the psychological costs that elite military operations exact on those who perform them. After her final deployment, during which she had participated in a particularly harrowing rescue operation that had saved the lives of an entire Navy SEAL team, Rachel had realized that she needed to step back from the constant exposure to life-and-death situations that had defined her identity for 5 years. The transition to civilian life had been challenging in ways that military discharge counselors hadn't adequately prepared her for. Rachel's skills in crisis management, emergency medical care, and leadership under pressure didn't translate easily to typical civilian careers, and she had struggled to find work that provided both financial stability and the sense of purpose that military service had given her. Flight attendant training had appealed to Rachel because it combined customer service skills with emergency response responsibilities, allowing her to use some of her military training while building a completely different kind of career. The safety and security aspect of commercial aviation reminded her of military operations, but in a context that focused on prevention and routine rather than combat and rescue. Over 7 years with American Airlines, Rachel had built a reputation for exceptional performance during the rare emergencies that disrupted normal flight operations. She had managed medical emergencies with a kind of calm efficiency that impressed both passengers and fellow crew members, and her ability to coordinate passenger evacuations during mechanical problems had earned recognition from airline safety officials who appreciated her instinctive understanding of emergency procedures. This morning's flight from Norfolk Naval Air Station to San Diego was routine in every respect that mattered to commercial aviation operations. The Boeing 757 was fully loaded with a mix of military personnel traveling on leave, defense contractors heading to meetings at West Coast installations, and civilian passengers making the cross-country journey for business and personal reasons. Rachel had noticed during boarding that several passengers in first class appeared to be active duty or recently retired military personnel, recognizable by subtle indicators like their posture, communication patterns, and the way they organize their carry-on luggage. As a former service member herself, she felt a natural affinity for military passengers and often made special efforts to ensure their comfort during flights. What Rachel couldn't have known was that 4 of the passengers in first class were members of SEAL Team 5, returning from a classified training exercise that had lasted 3 weeks and had tested their skills in scenarios that simulated some of the most dangerous missions that special operations forces might be called upon to undertake. The SEALs were traveling in civilian clothes and keeping their military identities private, as was standard procedure for special operations personnel during commercial travel. But their training and experience had made them naturally observant of crew members, security procedures, and the overall operational environment of any transportation system they used. As Rachel began the morning beverage service, Moving through first class with her characteristic professionalism and attention to detail, she had no way of anticipating that her voice, calm, confident, and carrying the subtle authority that came from years of military leadership experience, was about to trigger recognition that would transform a routine flight into an emotional reunion 8 years in the making. "Good morning, gentlemen," Rachel said to the 4 passengers in seats 2A through 2D, her voice carrying the warm but professional tone that she had perfected during her years of commercial aviation service. "Can I offer you coffee, juice, or something else to drink this morning?" The response from the 4 men was immediate and dramatic. All conversation stopped, heads turned with sharp attention, and 4 sets of eyes focused on Rachel with a kind of intense recognition that comes from hearing a voice that had once been the difference between life and death in circumstances none of them would ever forget. Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres, seated in 2A, felt his coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips as Rachel's voice triggered a flood of memory from 8 years earlier. The tone, the cadence, the underlying confidence. It was unmistakably the voice that had guided him and his team through the most terrifying night of their military careers, a voice that had remained calm and authoritative even when everything else had gone catastrophically wrong during a rescue operation in the South China Sea. "Angel 7. This is Rescue Swimmer 1, the voice had said through their radio headsets during that long-ago mission. "I've got visual on your position. Maintain your current heading and prepare for emergency extraction. We're coming to get you, and we're not leaving without everyone." The mission had been classified at the highest levels, but the basic facts were burned into Torres's memory forever. His SEAL team had been conducting reconnaissance on a hostile installation when their insertion helicopter had been shot down by surface-to-air missiles, leaving 6 Navy SEALs stranded in enemy waters with limited equipment, no communication with their command structure, and hostile forces searching for them with increasing intensity. For 18 hours, they had evaded capture while moving toward a predetermined extraction point, but their situation had become increasingly desperate as enemy patrols closed in and their physical condition deteriorated. When the rescue helicopter finally appeared on the horizon, it had seemed like salvation, until a second surface-to-air missile had disabled the aircraft's main rotor system, forcing an emergency landing that left both the original SEAL team and their rescue crew stranded in the same hostile territory. That's when the voice that Torres now recognized as belonging to Rachel Martinez had taken control of the situation with a kind of calm leadership that military personnel are trained to follow instinctively, even when circumstances seem hopeless. Petty Officer Jake Williams, in seat 2B, had also recognized Rachel's voice immediately. During that same rescue operation, he had been wounded by shrapnel from the downed helicopter and was losing blood rapidly when Rachel had rappelled from a second rescue aircraft into the middle of a firefight to provide emergency medical care and coordinate the evacuation of both the original SEAL team and the crew of the first rescue helicopter. "This is Rescue Swimmer 1, her voice had said through the chaos of gunfire and helicopter noise. "I need you to stay calm and follow my instructions exactly. We're going to get everyone out of here, but I need you to help me by staying conscious and helping with the other wounded." Williams remembered her hands working on his injuries with a kind of steady precision that comes from extensive medical training, while simultaneously coordinating radio communications between multiple aircraft and ground support teams. She had been everywhere at once, treating wounds, organizing defensive positions, and maintaining communication with rescue coordination centers that were trying to provide support from hundreds of miles away. Lieutenant Commander David Kim, seated in 2C, had been the senior officer present during that rescue operation, but he had recognized immediately that Rachel's expertise in rescue coordination and emergency medical care made her the natural leader for managing the evacuation phase of their crisis. Her voice had carried the kind of authority that transcended military rank structures, the confidence of someone who had faced similar situations before and knew exactly how to organize complex rescue operations under extreme pressure. "Sir, I need you to coordinate your team's defensive positions while I manage the medical casualties and radio communications," she had told him with respectful but firm directness. "We've got multiple aircraft inbound, but we need to hold this position for another 40 minutes until they can establish air cover and secure the extraction zone." The 4th SEAL, Senior Chief Petty Officer Robert Martinez, no relation to Rachel despite sharing her married surname, remembered her voice from the most critical moment of the entire rescue operation. When the second rescue helicopter had also taken fire and been forced to make an emergency landing, leaving 12 military personnel stranded with limited ammunition and medical supplies, Rachel's voice had been the steady constant that had kept everyone focused on survival rather than panic. "Listen to me carefully," her voice had said through their radio headsets as enemy forces closed in on their position. "We've got a third rescue package inbound, but they are going to need us to mark our position with signal flares and maintain defensive fire until they can extract us. Everyone needs to follow my instructions exactly, and we're all going home tonight." Now, 8 years later, the 4 SEALs found themselves staring at a commercial flight attendant who was offering them coffee and juice, trying to reconcile a professional woman in the airline uniform with a warrior who had risked her life to save theirs in one of the most dangerous rescue operations in recent Navy history. Rachel noticed a sudden change in the atmosphere around seats 2A through 2D, but initially attributed it to the kind of recognition that sometimes occurred when former military personnel encountered each other in civilian settings. Military veterans often recognize subtle signs of service background in others, and she assumed that these passengers had identified her as a fellow veteran through a bearing or communication style. "Is everything all right, gentlemen?" Rachel asked, her professional training taking precedence over her curiosity about their obvious reaction to her presence. Chief Torres was the first to recover his composure enough to speak, but his voice carried emotional weight that was unmistakable. This might sound strange, but were you ever stationed with Navy search and rescue operations? Your voice sounds very familiar." Rachel felt a familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied questions about her military service. She had worked hard to build a civilian identity that didn't require her to regularly revisit the most intense and dangerous experiences of her life, but she had never been comfortable with dishonesty about her background when directly questioned by fellow veterans. "Yes, I served 5 years with Navy SAR operations before transitioning to civilian life," Rachel replied carefully. "I specialize in combat rescue and emergency medical response." "Did we serve in the same theater?" The looks that the 4 men exchanged confirmed what Rachel was beginning to suspect. This wasn't a casual recognition between veterans who might have crossed paths at military bases or training facilities. This was something more specific and more personal, and it was connected to missions and experiences that she had spent years trying to integrate into her civilian identity without allowing them to dominate her present life. Lieutenant Commander Kim leaned forward in his seat, his voice carrying the respectful formality that military protocol demanded even in civilian settings. "If you're who we think you are, then we owe you our lives. All 4 of us were part of a SEAL team that you helped rescue from a very difficult situation in the South China Sea about 8 years ago." Rachel Martinez felt a familiar emotional weight that always accompanied discussions of her most dangerous military missions, but she also experienced something she hadn't felt in years: the recognition and gratitude of people whose lives had been directly impacted by her service. As she looked at the 4 men in seats 2A through 2D, memories of their harrowing rescue operation began to resurface with vivid clarity. "Operation Neptune Recovery," Rachel said quietly, using the classified name for the mission that had defined the final months of her military career. "South China Sea, September 15th, 2016. 6 SEALs, 2 helicopter crews, 18 hours behind enemy lines." The confirmation sent a visible wave of emotion through all 4 SEALs. Chief Torres stood up from his seat, his military bearing overriding civilian A-plane etiquette as he extended his hand to Rachel with a kind of formal respect that was reserved for life-and-death situations. "I'm Chief Petty Officer Michael Torres, SEAL Team 5. You saved my life and the lives of my entire team. I've thought about that mission in your voice almost every day for 8 years, wondering if we'd ever have a chance to thank you properly." Rachel shook his hand, her own military training causing her to respond with the same formal courtesy despite the civilian setting. "Chief Torres, you and your team performed with exceptional courage under impossible circumstances. I was just doing my job as part of the rescue coordination effort." But as the other 3 SEALs also rose from their seats to formally introduce themselves and express their gratitude, Rachel realized that her perspective on that mission was fundamentally different from theirs. What she remembered as a complex rescue operation that had required all her training and experience was, from their perspective, a miraculous salvation that had snatched them from certain death or capture. Petty Officer Williams, whose wounds Rachel had treated during the rescue, spoke with emotion that was unmistakable despite his attempt to maintain military composure. When you rappelled down into that firefight and started working on my injuries, you told me I was going to be fine and that we were all going home. I was losing a lot of blood and was pretty sure I was going to die, but something about your voice made me believe that survival was possible. Rachel remembered Williams clearly now, a young SEAL who had taken shrapnel to his leg and shoulder, bleeding heavily but still trying to maintain defensive positions despite his injuries. She had provided emergency medical care while coordinating radio communications with multiple rescue aircraft, a multitasking challenge that had required every aspect of her training in combat medicine and rescue operations. You were tougher than you gave yourself credit for, Rachel told Williams. The medical training we received prepared us for exactly those kinds of injuries, and you followed instructions perfectly despite the pain and stress you were experiencing. Lieutenant Commander Kim, who had been the senior military officer during the rescue but had deferred to Rachel's expertise in rescue coordination, addressed the broader strategic aspect of the operation that had impressed him most. The way you managed communications between 4 different aircraft, coordinated medical care for 6 wounded personnel, and organized defensive positions while under enemy fire was the most professional rescue operation I've ever witnessed. Rachel's response reflected the humility and team-focused perspective that had characterized her military service. "Sir, that rescue succeeded because everyone performed their roles perfectly under extreme pressure. The helicopter crews, your SEAL team, the ground support coordinators, and the air cover pilots all contributed skills that were essential for bringing everyone home safely." Senior Chief Martinez, the most senior enlisted man among the rescued SEALs, addressed something that Rachel hadn't fully understood at the time, the broader significance of their rescue for ongoing military operations in that region. "I don't know if you were ever briefed on this, but our mission was collecting intelligence that prevented a major terrorist attack on naval installations. If we had been captured or killed, that information would never have reached our command structure. Your rescue operation didn't just save 6 lives, it saved potentially hundreds of lives by ensuring that critical intelligence reached the people who needed it." This was new information for Rachel, who had been focused on the immediate tactical challenges of the rescue operation, and hadn't been briefed on the broader strategic implications of the SEAL team's mission. Learning that her actions had contributed to preventing terrorist attacks added another layer of meaning to an operation that she had always remembered primarily for its technical complexity and emotional intensity. As other first-class passengers began to take notice of the unusual conversation taking place around seats 2A through 2D, Rachel realized that she needed to balance a desire to reconnect with these men whose lives had intersected with haze so dramatically against her professional responsibilities as a flight attendant and her personal preference for keeping her military service private. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your gratitude more than I can express, but I think we should probably continue this conversation after we reach San Diego," Rachel said with a smile that combined genuine warmth with professional discretion. "I still have beverage service to complete, and I imagine other passengers might be curious about why their flight attendant is receiving military honors in the middle of the cabin." But Chief Torres had one more thing he needed to say, something that he had been carrying for 8 years and had never expected to have the opportunity to express directly. "I want you to know that your voice has been in my head during every difficult mission since that rescue. When things get dangerous or complicated, I remember how calm and confident you sounded when you told us we were all going home. That voice has got to me through situations where I might otherwise have panicked or given up." The other SEALs nodded in agreement, indicating that they had all experienced similar psychological impacts from their rescue experience. Rachel's voice hadn't just guided them through one dangerous night. It had become a source of strength and confidence that had influenced their performance throughout the rest of their military careers. Rachel felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she realized that her military service had affected these men in ways that went far beyond the immediate rescue operation. The voice that she used every day to serve coffee and manage routine passenger requests had once been a lifeline for warriors in their darkest hour, and it had continued to provide strength and courage long after that mission had ended. As she moved to continue her beverage service, Rachel carried with her a new understanding of how her past and present lives were connected, and how the skills she had developed in military service continued to serve others even in her civilian career. As Flight 318 continued its westward journey across the American heartland, Rachel Martinez found herself unable to concentrate fully on her normal service duties. The encounter with the four SEALs in first class had awakened memories and emotions that she had spent years learning to manage, but it had also provided her with a perspective on her military service that she had never fully understood while she was actively performing rescue operations. During a brief break in passenger service, Rachel approached Chief Torres with a question that had been troubling her since their initial conversation. "Chief, you mentioned that my voice helped you during other missions after our rescue operation. I'm curious about that because I've always wondered about the long-term impact of rescue operations on the people we helped. In SAR training, we focus on immediate medical and tactical challenges, but we weren't really taught about the psychological aftermath for rescue survivors." Torres's response revealed insights into military psychology that Rachel hadn't encountered during her own service experience. When you experience a situation where you're certain you're going to die, and then someone appears who takes control and guides you to safety, that person's voice becomes associated with survival and hope in ways that affect your thinking for years afterward. He continued with details that demonstrated the lasting impact of that rescue operation on all four SEALs. During training exercises, combat deployments, and other high-stress situations, we've all found ourselves remembering your voice and confidence it projected when everything seemed hopeless. It's become a psychological anchor that helps us maintain composure when other people might panic. Petty Officer Williams added his own perspective on the psychological dimensions of their rescue experience. The medical care you provided during that rescue wasn't just about treating physical injuries. The way you explained what you were doing reassured me about my condition and kept me focused on helping with the mission rather than worrying about my wounds. That taught me how to manage pain and fear in ways that have been useful throughout my military career. Rachel was beginning to understand that her impact on these men had extended far beyond the immediate rescue operation. Her voice, her medical expertise, and her leadership during crisis situations had provided them with models for their own behavior during subsequent dangerous missions, creating a ripple effect that had influenced their effectiveness as military professionals for 8 years. Lieutenant Commander Kim addressed the leadership aspects of Rachel's performance that had impressed him most during the rescue operation. The way you coordinated multiple aircraft, managed medical priorities, and organized offensive operations while under enemy fire demonstrated crisis leadership at the highest level. I've tried to apply those same principles during my own command responsibilities, and they've made me more effective as an officer. But it was Senior Chief Martinez who provided Rachel with the most surprising information about the lasting effects of their rescue operation. I don't know if this violates any operational security protocols, but I think you should know that your rescue techniques and communication methods have been studied and incorporated into advanced rescue training programs. The Navy uses recordings of your radio communications during that mission as examples of how rescue coordination should be conducted under extreme conditions. This revelation was both flattering and troubling for Rachel. She was proud that her methods had been considered worthy of study and replication, but she was also concerned about the implications of having her voice and techniques recorded and analyzed without her knowledge or consent. Senior Chief, I appreciate that information, but I'm curious about how those recordings were obtained and used. During my military service, I was never informed that mission communications were being recorded for training purposes, and I'm not sure how I feel about my voice being used in training programs without my permission. Martinez's response indicated that Rachel's concerns about privacy and consent were valid and reflected broader issues with how the military handled training materials derived from actual combat operations. You raise legitimate questions about informed consent and privacy rights that I can't fully answer. What I can tell you is that your techniques have trained hundreds of rescue personnel who have gone on to save lives in situations where they might not have been as effective without that training. As their conversation continued, Rachel began to understand that her military service had created legacies and influences that extended far beyond her personal experience or knowledge. The rescue operation that she remembered as one mission among many had become a case study in crisis leadership and rescue coordination that was still affecting military training programs 8 years later. But the most significant revelation came when Chief Torres shared information about how their rescued SEAL team had continued to serve together and had been influenced by their rescue experience in ways that affected their approach to their own rescue and support missions. After our rescue, our team requested assignment to missions that involved supporting other rescue operations. We wanted to give back to the SAR community that had saved our lives, and we participated in dozens of missions where we provided security and tactical support for rescue operations similar to the one that saved us. This information provided Rachel with a new understanding of how her military service had created ongoing positive impacts through the people she had helped. The SEALs she had rescued had gone on to support other rescue operations, creating a multiplier effect that had potentially saved additional lives through their enhanced commitment to rescue and recovery missions. As Flight 318 began its descent towards San Diego, Rachel realized that her encounter with these four men had fundamentally changed her understanding of both her military service and her civilian career. She had spent years trying to separate her past identity as a Navy rescue swimmer from her present role as a commercial flight attendant, but now she understood that the skills, experience, and mindset that had defined her military service continued to influence everything she did, even in civilian contexts. The voice that had guided Navy SEALs through their darkest hour was the same voice that now provided comfort and security to airline passengers during routine flights and emergencies alike. Her military training in crisis management, emergency medical care, and leadership under pressure continued to serve others every day, even when she wasn't consciously applying those skills to military-style situations. As Flight 318 began its final approach into San Diego International Airport, Rachel Martinez found herself experiencing emotions that she hadn't felt since leaving military service 8 years earlier. The unexpected reunion with the four Navy SEALs had not only reconnected her with a significant chapter of her past, but had also provided her with a new understanding of how her military experience continued to influence her civilian career and personal identity. During the descent, Chief Torres approached Rachel with a proposal that would challenge her assumptions about the separation she had tried to maintain between her military and civilian lives. I hope this doesn't seem presumptuous, but my team and I would like to invite you to join us for dinner tonight in San Diego. We have some things we'd like to share with you about how your rescue operation affected not just us, but other people whose lives were impacted by our subsequent service. Rachel's initial reaction was hesitation, born from years of trying to avoid situations that would require her to revisit the most intense experiences of a military career. But she also recognized that these men represented a connection to purpose and meaning that had been missing from her civilian life, despite her professional success as a flight attendant. I appreciate the invitation, Chief, and I'd like to hear more about how your service continued after that rescue operation. But I should be honest with you about something. I left military service partly because I found it difficult to deal with the emotional intensity of constant life and death situations. Reconnecting with that experience brings up feelings that I've spent years learning to manage. Torres's response demonstrated the kind of understanding that comes from shared experience with military transitions and the psychological challenges that many veterans face when adjusting to civilian life. We understand those challenges because we've all dealt with them in different ways. What we'd like to share with you tonight isn't about reliving dangerous missions or celebrating combat operations. It's about understanding the positive impact that military service can have on people's lives, and how the skills we developed in the military continue to serve others even after we transition to different careers. As Rachel considered the invitation, she realized that her encounter with these SEALs had already begun to change her perspective on the relationship between her military and civilian identities. For 8 years, she had been trying to compartmentalize her past service as something separate from her present life, but now she was beginning to understand that integration rather than separation might be a healthy approach to managing her military experience. Lieutenant Commander Kim added another dimension to the invitation that appealed to Rachel's sense of service and her interest in understanding the broader implications of a military career. We're also hoping to introduce you to some other people tonight, rescue personnel who have been trained using techniques derived from your mission recordings, and veterans who have been helped by programs that our team has supported using lessons we learned from our rescue experience. We think you'd find it meaningful to see how your service has continued to influence people's lives. This prospect was both appealing and intimidating for Rachel. She was curious about the extended impact of a military service, but she was also concerned about being overwhelmed by emotional connections to experiences that she had worked hard to process and integrate into her civilian identity. As the aircraft touched down at San Diego International Airport and passengers began gathering their belongings, Rachel made a decision that reflected her growing understanding of how her past and present lives were connected rather than separated. Gentlemen, I accept your invitation, with the understanding that this is about celebrating service and positive impacts rather than reliving combat experiences. I'm interested in learning more about how military skills continue to serve people after we transition to civilian careers. What followed that evening was one of the most meaningful experiences Rachel had encountered since leaving military service. The dinner arranged by the Four SEALs included 12 other people whose lives had been affected directly or indirectly by Rachel's rescue operation and her training methods. 2 were Navy rescue swimmers who had been trained using Rachel's radio communication techniques and had gone on to conduct successful rescue operations that saved civilian and military lives. 3 were veterans who had been helped by support programs that the rescued SEAL team had established to assist other military personnel dealing with post-combat psychological challenges. Most significantly, 5 were family members of people who had been saved by rescue operations conducted by personnel who had been trained using methods derived from Rachel's mission. These included the wife of a commercial fisherman who had been rescued from a sinking vessel by Coast Guard personnel trained in Rachel's communication techniques, and the parent of a Marine pilot who had been extracted from hostile territory by rescue swimmers who had studied Rachel's approach to coordinating complex multi-aircraft operations. As Rachel listened to their stories, she began to understand that her military service had created what military strategists call force multiplier effects, influences that extended far beyond her direct actions to affect numerous other people through training, inspiration, and the ongoing service of people she had helped. The most emotional moment of the evening came when Chief Torres presented Rachel with a framed certificate signed by the commanding officers of SEAL Team 5, officially recognizing her as an honorary member of their unit and acknowledging her continuing influence on their service and training programs. This doesn't change your civilian status or create any military obligations, Torres explained. But it represents our recognition that your service continues to influence military operations and save lives through the people you trained, the techniques you developed, and the example you provided for crisis leadership under impossible conditions. Rachel's response reflected both her gratitude for the recognition and her evolving understanding of how military experience could be integrated with rather than separated from civilian identity. This means more to me than I can express, not just because of the recognition, but because it helps me understand that leaving military service doesn't mean leaving service behind. The skills we develop and the people we help during military careers continue to create positive impacts long after we transition to civilian life. 3 months after her unexpected reunion with the Navy SEALs aboard Flight 318, Rachel Martinez stood before a classroom of new flight attendants at American Airlines training facility in Dallas, Texas. But this wasn't a routine customer service session or emergency procedures review. Rachel had been selected to develop and teach a specialized program that would integrate her military rescue experience with civilian aviation emergency response, creating the first comprehensive course of its kind in commercial airline training. The program, officially titled Advanced Crisis Leadership and Emergency Coordination, had been developed after American Airlines executives learned about Rachel's background through the media coverage that followed her reunion with the rescued SEALs. The airline recognized that Rachel's unique combination of military rescue experience and civilian aviation expertise represented an opportunity to enhance their emergency response capabilities in ways that could benefit both crew members and passengers. The principles of crisis leadership remain consistent whether you're coordinating a rescue operation in hostile territory or managing a medical emergency at 35,000 feet, Rachel explained to her class of experienced flight attendants. The skills that military personnel develop for high-stress situations can be adapted to enhance civilian emergency response in ways that improve outcomes for everyone involved. Rachel's teaching approach combined practical demonstrations with theoretical frameworks, showing a student how military communication techniques could improve coordination with cockpit crews during emergencies, how medical training from combat environments could enhance passenger care during health crises, and how leadership principles from rescue operations could help cabin crews maintain passenger calm during potentially dangerous situations. But the most significant aspect of Rachel's new role wasn't just the training she provided to other flight attendants. The program had also attracted attention from military training commands, leading to her appointment as civilian consultant for advanced rescue training programs that prepared military personnel for the kinds of complex operations she had once performed in active service. This dual role, training civilian aviation personnel while consulting with military rescue programs, had provided Rachel with the integration between her military and civilian identities that she had been seeking for 8 years. Instead of trying to compartmentalize her past service as something separate from her present career, she was now using her complete range of experience to enhance both civilian and military emergency response capabilities. The success of Rachel's training programs had led to recognition that extended far beyond the aviation industry. The Department of Homeland Security had requested her input on emergency response protocols for transportation systems, and the American Red Cross had invited her to help develop disaster response training that incorporated lessons from military rescue operations. Most personally meaningful to Rachel was a letter she received from the widow of a commercial pilot whose life had been saved by a flight attendant trained in Rachel's advanced emergency response techniques. The pilot had suffered a heart attack during flight, and the flight attendant's application of Rachel's medical training and communication methods had been critical for coordinating the successful emergency landing and immediate medical care that saved his life. "I wanted you to know that your training saved my husband's life," the letter read. The flight attendant who took care of him told me that she had learned her techniques from a former Navy rescue swimmer who taught advanced emergency response methods. "My husband recovered completely and returned to flying, and our family will always be grateful for the service you continue to provide even after leaving the military." But perhaps the most significant development in Rachel's post-reunion life was her involvement with a non-profit organization established by the 4 SEALs she had rescued. The Veteran Rescue Foundation, created to support current and former military rescue personnel dealing with transition challenges, had recruited Rachel to serve on their board of directors and help develop programs for veterans whose specialized skills were being underutilized in civilian careers. "The problem isn't that military rescue personnel lack valuable skills," Rachel explained during a foundation fundraising event. "The problem is that civilian employers often don't understand how military experience translates to civilian applications, and veterans sometimes struggle to adapt their specialized knowledge to non-military contexts." The Foundation's programs help veterans identify civilian careers that could utilize their military training while providing them with the additional education and certification needed to transition successfully. Rachel's own experience had become a model for how military rescue experience could enhance civilian emergency response capabilities when properly integrated and supported. 6 months after her reunion with the SEALs, Rachel received an unexpected phone call that would add another dimension to her evolving post-military career. The call was from Admiral Patricia Stevens, the commanding officer of Naval Air Systems Command, who had been following Rachel's work with airline emergency response training and veteran transition programs. Petty Officer Martinez, Admiral Stevens began, using Rachel's former military rank despite her civilian status. "I'm calling to discuss an opportunity that might interest you. The Navy is developing new training programs for rescue coordination and emergency response, and we need someone with your combination of operational experience and civilian training expertise to help design and implement these programs." What Admiral Stevens was offering was positioned as a civilian contractor that would allow Rachel to contribute directly to military training programs while maintaining her civilian career and identity. The role would involve developing rescue training curricula, evaluating new emergency response technologies, and providing instruction for advanced rescue personnel. Rachel's response reflected the integration of her military and civilian identities that had been developing since her reunion with the rescued SEALs. "Admiral, I'm honored by the opportunity and interested in contributing to military rescue training programs. But I want to make sure that this role allows me to continue my civilian work with commercial aviation emergency response, because I believe that cross-pollination between military and civilian emergency response methods benefits both communities." The position that Rachel ultimately accepted represented the perfect synthesis of her military experience and civilian expertise. As a contractor with Naval Air Systems Command, she would spend half her time developing military rescue training programs and half her time teaching advanced emergency response techniques to civilian aviation personnel. More importantly, her new role included responsibility for developing programs that would help other military rescue personnel transition to civilian careers where their specialized skills could continue to serve the public in different contexts. A year after her chance encounter with the 4 Navy SEALs aboard Flight 318, Rachel Martinez had transformed from a flight attendant trying to separate her military past from her civilian present into a bridge between military and civilian emergency response communities. Her voice, which had once guided Navy SEALs through their darkest hour, now trained both military rescue personnel and civilian flight attendants, ensuring that the skills and experience she had developed during her military service continued to save lives in multiple contexts. Standing before her latest class of advanced emergency response trainees, a mixed group of military rescue personnel and civilian flight attendants learning from each other, Rachel realized that her journey from military service to civilian career to integrated professional identity had provided her with exactly the purpose and meaning she had been seeking since leaving active duty. Sometimes our most important missions are the ones that continue long after we think our service has ended, and sometimes the voices that guide us through crisis become the voices that teach others to guide themselves through their own challenging moments. This story reminds us that the skills we develop during one chapter of our lives continue to serve others long after the chapter has ended, and that true service often involves finding ways to integrate our diverse experiences in service of something greater than ourselves. Rachel's journey from military rescue swimmer to civilian flight attendant to emergency response trainer demonstrates that we never really leave our calling behind. We simply find new ways to answer it. Sometimes the most important recognition comes not from medals or commendations, but from discovering that our voice continues to guide others towards safety and hope long after we thought our mission was complete. What did you think of Rachel's story? Rate it from 1 to 10, and let us know where you're listening from. Thank you for watching and sharing this moment with us.